Hello, my name is Denise Hoban, and you're about to watch a 15-minute instructional video on how to create pivot tables in Microsoft Excel. This is a very condensed training session for individuals that already have an intermediate to advanced knowledge of Excel. I recommend that you watch the video, then watch it again as you simultaneously create your own dataset and pivot table to get hands-on experience. You can pause and restart the video as you go. The only way you are going to learn is by trial and error and practicing. Now let's get started. How to create pivot tables. In this presentation, we are going to take a look at creating pivot tables in Excel 2010. I'm going to start with a very simple example to explain the basic concept and terminology of pivot tables. What is a pivot table? A pivot table is a data summarization tool found in programs such as spreadsheets. A pivot table can automatically sort, count, total, or provide data averages. A pivot table starts with a user-defined data set or source of detailed data. The pivot table will display the summarized results of your data source in a second table. The user sets up and changes the pivot table structure by dragging and dropping fields graphically. This rotation or pivoting of the summary table gives the concept its name, pivot table. Pivot tables make it easy to arrange, drill into, and summarize large amounts of complicated, detailed data. Pivot tables make it easy to identify trends and patterns. And creating pivot tables is a lot easier than you may think. The first step in creating a pivot table is to have a data source, as shown on my screen. Each row in this data source will represent a specific transaction or record of data. In my example, I'm going to start with a very simple list reflecting PCR name, PCR area, PCR state, contract ID, contract sign date, and contract amount. Please note in the print screen that each column header must have a clearly defined title. In other words, the column title cannot be blank. You can also not have any blank records within your data range. Please note in my example that I have named my data source tab raw data. Now what's nice about the various Microsoft programs is that there are many different alternatives to perform different actions. I'm going to show you the easiest way that I have found to create a simple pivot table. So the next step in our process of developing a pivot table will be to highlight the data that you want to summarize. When doing this, you would highlight all of the column headers and row data. You would make sure that you do not include the column row total. Next, you would click the Insert tab on the top toolbar menu. Then in the Tables section, you would click on the Pivot Table icon. A dialog box called Create Pivot Table will be displayed on your screen. Under the Choose Data that you want to analyze section, ensure that the Select a Table or Range radial icon is automatically pre-selected. Please note in the table range data is coming from the Raw Data tab and it's pre-selected cells A5 through F16. Also, under the section that says choose where you want the pivot table report to be placed, we actually in this example we're going to create a brand new worksheet tab that the pivot table will appear in. Simply click the OK button. Please note that a new tab has been added to our Excel file, and also a pivot table report has been added to our Excel file as well. Now let's examine a little bit of the options on the pivot tables that we have available to us. First, I'm going to expand the pivot table field list just by left mousing and dragging that box to be open a little bit wider. Okay. From our pivot table field list, you can see that all of the names in our detailed data from our raw data tab have been added as selection options within our pivot table region. On the bottom part of the pivot table field list, there are 4 different options: report filter, column labels, row labels, and values. Now let's take a look at how you can actually populate your report. I'm going to show you a couple of different examples on how you add the fields to your report. Simplest way, just check the box of the field that you want to have added. As you notice, our names are over here to the left now. I'm going to uncheck that now. A second way you can do it is to drag the field down to one of the 4 quadrants at the bottom of the field list. I'm going to do that now. So I'm just left mouse and I'm dragging this field down to the row labels section. The row labels is just that. It's going to be part of a row. Just for the sake of having a good example to play with, I'm going to also grab the area, the state, and the ID. And actually, let's just go ahead and grab the sign date as well. Now, I personally do not like the pivot table format in Excel 2010. My preference happens to be the classic format. You can change this to the classic format by right-mousing anywhere within your pivot table, selecting Pivot Table Options, go to the Display tab at the top of the screen, click on that, and then checking the Classic Pivot Table Layout option. Then go ahead and click the OK button. Another visual thing that I like to do is to put borders around the cells. To do this, you'll first need to highlight the entire pivot table. And how I do that is I find the very top row of my pivot table, and you can see that there's an arrow that indicates that I'm going to highlight the entire pivot table. I left mouse, and you notice that the entire pivot table is highlighted. Then make sure you're on the Home tab. Then click the down arrow with the Borders option and select All Borders. I'm going to click anywhere on the screen just to get off of that particular pivot table. You notice that when I click anywhere else on the screen, our field list option disappears. You'll also notice that for each one of our fields has a subtotal. We don't want those, and how you get rid of the subtotals on each line is you highlight the field name with your right mouse and then uncheck the subtotal option. Highlight the field, right mouse, get our drop-down list, and uncheck the subtotal option. Highlight the field, right mouse, uncheck the subtotal option. Right mouse, uncheck the subtotal option. Okay, so let's take a step back and take a look at what our report looks like. I'm going to bring in our contract dollar amount into the pivot table, and I do that by dragging it down to values. Now notice that the value automatically defaulted with the sum amount. You have to pay attention to this because sometimes it also defaults to a count amount. So that would be counting the number of contracts and not providing you a summary of the contract dollars. For right now, let's say that we want to see our area fields as column headers. How you do that? Notice in the lower quadrant of the pivot table field list, I'm going to the field called area, and with my left mouse button, I'm going to drag that field up to the column label section. Notice in our pivot table that area is now part of our columns. We can see by person, Bob Barker is in area 1, so is Tom Smith, and that we can also see a grand total of all the contract dollars for area 1. But let's say I don't want to see sign date, ID, or state. The way you could simply remove them from your pivot table, I'm sorry, I clicked off of it. I clicked back in the pivot table to get my field list to come back up. I'm going to unclick state. Notice how it disappeared from our pivot table. I'm going to unclick ID, and I'm going to unclick sign date. So all of those fields have now automatically removed from our pivot table area. The formatting of the numbers isn't very visually appealing. So I'm going to show you how to change those values. Go down to the section, the quadrant that says values, highlight the field that you're looking at, and click Value Field Settings. As you can see here from this screen, this is how you would also change it to be a count or an average, or show the maximum amount, minimum amount, a lot of different options there. For right now, what we want to do, we want to change the format of the number. So I'm clicking on the number format button. I could do currency. I personally always like just doing the number because I don't necessarily want to see the dollar sign in front of the figure all the time. And I don't want to see the cents. I just want to concentrate on what the whole dollar amounts are. So I've clicked on 0 for decimal places. I've also clicked on use the thousands separator because I want to see that comma in there separating the thousands of dollars. And now I'm just going to click the OK button. And I'm going to click the OK button again. Notice how the formatting of our dollars have now changed. Okay, now let's take a look at, do a couple of different reports, use a couple different examples on showing you why pivot tables are so robust to easily summarize and consolidate information the way that you want to see it. So let's say that we just want to take a look at the employee award contracts for Area 6. How you would do that is you would use the filter option on the area button. Actually, there's a couple of different ways. I'll show you this one first. I've clicked on that drop down. I'm going to uncheck all of the options and just highlight Area 6 and click the OK button. Notice that we have 2 people in Area 6 and these are their award dollars. So I'm going to show you another example now. Actually, if you, let's say you wanted to see more than one area, you can select more than one area at a time just by checking off the boxes that you do and do not want to see. Area 5 and Area 6 are now showing. Okay, I'm going to unclick all the areas and select all just to get us back to where we originally started. Okay, the other way you can summarize this information by filtering on area. Let's say I don't want to see the area above as a column. What we can do is we'll drag the area over to the report filter section and notice that it's no longer a column header. However, it appears now over our pivot table. Using the same principle, we click that drop down box and we select Area 6 and click OK. And again, it shows us our 2 people, their contract award dollars resummarized. All right, let's say I'm going to put this back to our original state again and move the area back over to the column. Now let's say that we want to take a look at the count of employees for each area and by state. Okay, how we would do this is we're going to leave area as our column header here on top. We're going to remove the dollar amount because we no longer care about that. We want to see a count of employees. So we're going to uncheck that button, and instead we are now going to copy the name or drag the name over to the values section. And we wanted to see it by state, so I'm going to drag state back down into the row labels section. Now we can see that we have 2 employees in Area 6. One is in California and one is in Nevada. Let's say you're looking at the state of DC and you notice that you have 2 employees in there and you want to see who those employees are. All you have to do is take the name field and drag it underneath state. And now you can see that in DC is Jane Doe and Wendy Brown, and you still have your count of employees for that state. And that wraps up our quick, short, sweet and simple presentation on Introduction to Pivot Tables. Thank you.